In part 2, I asked you what malware you wanted to learn about next. We received hundreds of responses, and the top 2 topics requested were kernel mode rootkits and how to defend against rootkits. So we'll cover both of those topics in this special popular demand episode. Remember, a rootkit is an attack tool that hides the presence and activity of an intruder on your computer or network. A rootkit essentially makes your computer lie to you about what's going on. Some rootkits can lie better than others because they install in the kernel. What does that mean? That's our first topic. If you run a network, you already know that an operating system has levels of privileges and permissions. For example, you grant yourself permission to set up a Windows group, but you don't grant an anonymous user the same privilege. This idea of levels of permission goes all the way to the core of the computer, right down to the CPU itself. Your CPU implements an access control method called rings. Rings are a logical construct. That's geek speak for they're pretend. We made them up to help us organize a concept. The x86 family of processors think they manage 4 rings. Ring 0, 1, 2, and 3. Each ring represents a different level of privilege. Ring 0 is the most privileged and thus has the most power. Ring 3 is the least privileged. Every computer function is associated with a ring, so the computer can properly manage its own integrity. The CPU won't allow a program running under a less privileged ring to access memory running in a more privileged ring. For example, a Ring 3 program can't touch code or memory associated with a Ring 0 program. So what happens inside these rings? The least privileged ring, Ring 3, is user land. In Ring 3, the CPU runs common applications such as a word processor, or lets you change your desktop wallpaper. The most privileged ring, Ring 0, is also known as the kernel. The kernel handles very low-level stuff, such as managing memory or device drivers. For example, when you're running lots of programs, the kernel decides which program gets to use the processor and when. Since the kernel has godlike powers, the operating system doesn't allow anything that executes in user land to access the kernel directly. What does all this mean to an attacker? Well, a user mode rootkit can only hook user mode functions. That means user mode rootkits can only hide for programs that also operate in user mode. But security vendors get their programs to work in kernel mode. A kernel mode program can easily recognize the lies made by a user mode rootkit. But if an attacker can get his rootkit to operate in kernel mode, the rootkit can lie effectively to both user mode and kernel mode programs, including any security software operating in the kernel. So potentially, kernel mode rootkits are more invisible than user mode rootkits. Now you know why rootkit authors would love to get their hooks into the kernel. But gaining kernel mode access is pretty difficult. Everything a user does, even an administrative user, happens in user mode. Plus, the kernel is complex and very finicky. One misstep from a kernel mode rootkit could cause your whole system to crash and become inoperable. So how does a rootkit author get his rootkit into the kernel? That's up next. Applications running in Ring 3, user mode, sometimes require help from functions running in the kernel. In these cases, Windows provides special mechanisms that allow certain user mode applications access to kernel code, but very indirectly. Let's take a peek at some of these indirect kernel access mechanisms, but put on your diving helmet because this gets deep. Remember this example from part 2? When a program wants to display a list of files in a directory, it might call a Windows API function to get its directory listing. In part 2, I said the directory listing function does its thing and then returns its results to the originating program. That's correct as far as it goes, but actually the process is a lot more complicated. Help me, Magic Whiteboard. You're my only hope. When a program calls the directory listing function, that function in turn calls a second function designed specifically to provide lower-level access to Windows. Since many different programs might call the same functions, the functions are stored where the programs can share them, in Distributed Link Libraries, DLLs. In Windows XP, a call for a directory listing goes to a DLL from the Win32 API, which hands a request to a second DLL from the native API. The function from the native API executes sysenter, an instruction provided by the CPU's instruction set as a way to request execution of a system service. The results of the sysenter land in the system service dispatcher, which will find the address in memory where the requested service lives, then execute the service.
The system service dispatcher gets the address of the ntquery directory file kernel function, then calls it. When the function executes, it communicates with the input-output manager to complete the request. Then the input-output...
Stop! To cover all this would take hours and bore you to death. Here's what you really need to know. A user mode rootkit hooks functions here, while a kernel mode rootkit hooks functions that occur here. Hooking here in ring 0, much more difficult, but much more powerful. That's it. Next we cover how to detect rootkits. Well, as soon as I figure out how to get out of this magic whiteboard. Now that you understand the two main types of rootkits, user mode and kernel mode, we're ready to talk about detection techniques. The most popular way to detect rootkits is called cross-view comparison. Remember, rootkits work by hooking calls to common operating system functions and changing their results. But no rootkit can intercept every function there is, so they're written to hook the most common, usual functions. Let's go back to our example of a directory listing. Normally, you get a directory listing by using a common as dirt function in a well-known Windows DLL. But you don't have to get a directory listing that way. You could program your own method of getting a directory listing. The rootkit wouldn't know about your custom function, so it couldn't hook it. Cross-view comparison extends that simple concept. A program carrying out cross-view comparison performs some typical system operation the conventional way and records that operation's results. Next, the cross-view comparison program carries out the exact same operation again, this time using an entirely different and unconventional method, again recording the results. Finally, the program compares the two results to each other. They should match. If the program detects any differences, then something is mucking with your system, and it could be a rootkit. To illustrate this, let's look at some popular rootkit detection programs. Rootkit Revealer can detect hidden files and registry entries using cross-view comparison. It scans the file system and registry using normal Windows API functions, then scans again using a specially designed lower-level read of raw sections of your file system and registry hive. Then it compares the results of the two scans. Let's see if Rootkit Revealer can detect our installation of Hacker Defender. Using it is easy. Run the application, accept a few license agreements, and then press Scan. As you can see, Rootkit Revealer found all of Hacker Defender's hidden files and registry entries. I can definitely tell there's a rootkit on this system. Hacker Defender is a user mode rootkit, so it's relatively easy for detection tools to spot. There are some downsides to Rootkit Revealer. First, it detects rootkits, but it doesn't clean them. Even when you know where to find a rootkit's hidden files and registry entries, removing them can be difficult without special tools. Also, Rootkit Revealer finds hidden files and registry entries, but it doesn't look for hidden processes, services, or network connections. Still, it's a free download, so the price is right. Let's look at another rootkit detector. F-Secure's Blacklight makes up for some of Rootkit Revealer's shortcomings. Like Rootkit Revealer, Blacklight uses cross-view comparison to find hidden files and registry entries on your computer. Plus, Blacklight also helps you clean all the files it finds by allowing you to rename them. For now, F-Secure is beta testing Blacklight, so it's free. But once they perfect it, you can expect them to charge for it. Also, like Rootkit Revealer, Blacklight Beta doesn't list hidden processes, services, or network connections. For the ultimate in rootkit hunting gadgetry, I recommend IceSword. IceSword is an uber-advanced rootkit detection program written in China. However, the tool is so popular and effective that its English-speaking fans have made a translated version. IceSword can find almost anything hidden on your system, including files, registry entries, processes, services, and network connections. It shows you active hooks in many different Windows subsystems. However, it isn't an automated tool like Rootkit Revealer and Blacklight Beta. I recommend it, but only if you're an advanced user who knows a lot about the Windows architecture. We could look at many more tools that help you detect rootkits. However, none are perfect. In fact, if a rootkit has kernel mode control, theoretically it could deceive kernel-level detection tools too. Really, the best way to combat rootkits is not to get them in the first place. That's the topic of our final segment. Finally, some good news. The security technologies and practices you already have in place can help protect you from rootkits, but your battle cry definitely needs to be defense in depth. An attacker can't install a rootkit on your system without first gaining access to it. Maintaining a firewall, such as your WatchGuard Firebox, and keeping your patches up to date will help prevent the bad guys from plopping rootkits onto your system at will. Antivirus software also helps. While AV software may not always detect a rootkit after it's installed on a PC, AV can detect some rootkits before they install. Keep your AV up to date. The same goes for anti-spyware. Besides acting as a normal firewall to keep the bad guys out, your Firebox also helps block rootkits with its default content stripping. The Firebox's HTTP, SMTP, and FTP proxies allow you to strip potentially malicious file content. In fact, the Firebox's default settings strip most of the malicious file types that rootkits use, such as .exe, .com, .bat, and others. If you use your Firebox's proxies, rootkit authors will have to work much harder to sneak into your network. Finally, you should recruit your users' help. Lately, much of the spyware and malware found on malicious websites or in spam email has included rootkit components for stealth. By interacting with email attachments or visiting the wrong website, your users might stumble upon rootkit infections. Tell them so. Teach them how to handle email and how to browse properly. This helps keep rootkits off your network. If you need help teaching your users about these issues, check out WatchGuard's SecurityWise curriculum, located at the URL shown on your screen. It'll help you educate your non-technical users, and it's free to live security subscribers. In 2006, a study by the University of Washington showed that the worst sources of spyware were game sites, music sites, and celebrity fan sites. For extra safety, use a URL filtering tool such as WatchGuard's Web Blocker to keep users away from risky, non-business websites. Let's be honest, the rootkit threat is scary. However, with the right combination of policy, technology, and user cooperation, you can usually keep these invisible scourges off your PCs and out of your network. Thanks for your strong support of our malware analysis series. Our next most requested topic is botnets, which we'll cover in our next episode. So stay subscribed to Live Security. I'll see you later.
Cut. That's a wrap. Striking.